4 out of 4 wins for Marc Marquez in 2025. Getting a bit boring, isn't it? If you're not a Marc Marquez fan. And if you're Alex Marquez's, biggest fan, well, if you're just a Marquez fan in general, you're seeing them 1-2 in every session. It must be pretty nice. But we've got other things to talk about after the weekend in Argentina. We've seen improvement from Honda. We've seen... Has Pecco Bagnaia's head dropped a little bit more after seeing the results from the other side of the garage and also the satellite Ducatis? Plenty to discuss. I'm joined by Pete McLaren and Lewis Duncan as ever. Lewis, we previewed the race and we kind of said if it goes to how it went in Thailand compared to Argentina, Marc Marquez should win. It wasn't fully comfortable though. He was made to work for it by his younger brother, but the points read 74. He scored the maximum, and yeah, he looks pretty good, doesn't he?
Yeah, I mean, it's almost a repeat of Thailand in terms results-wise. Certainly the sprint was a carbon copy of how that Thailand sprint went. Yeah, I mean, it's kind of going to plan, isn't it? We said pre-season Marc Marquez will be winning these early races. He'll be building out a lead in the championship, and that's kind of been the case. I think the biggest surprise more than anything is just how close Alex Marquez has pushed him, and that's not to discredit Alex Marquez, but year-old Ducati. It's not too dissimilar in spec, but we know the GP25 has some different parts on it that does give it a little bit of an advantage. And certainly as the season goes on, when they can introduce the new chassis and aero package, you'd have thought maybe that gap will widen a little bit. But I think the way that Alex Marquez has been able to push Marc has been kind of the real surprise there. The Argentina race was, Alex pushed him into a mistake. That early mistake at turn 4 where Marc ran wide, Alex was not very far behind him at all. And then a couple of times when Marc was following Alex, there was a few mistakes there as he was really, really having to push. If you actually look at the average pace from sort of lap 4 to 20 when Alex was leading, he was very, very marginally, but he was quicker over that stint than Marc was. So this isn't really, I think a lot of people maybe be thinking, well, Marc's going easy on his brother, I think he's definitely, when he is in a racing situation with Alex, that he has, he approaches it like he would approach a teammate, and that you just have that little extra bit of caution when you go for an overtake. You don't just barge it up the inside, depending on who your teammate is, I guess, obviously. But he does he has that extra thought when he goes for an overtake, but he doesn't hold back. And Alex certainly isn't holding back either. And I think Marc has been made to kind of work for things right now, and it'll be interesting to see how that kind of carries on into the next couple of races. As things are sort of we get into more normal tracks and things in theory should even out a bit. It'll be interesting to see if Alex can keep that heat on his brother.
Yeah, Pete, what do you make of it? Like, as Lewis says, Alex kind of got Marc off the bridle a little bit. He caught him basically through a mistake, and he was able to keep, you've seen the gap throughout the race. It was 4/10, 5/10, and Marc was making all sorts of shapes on that Ducati for the first time, really, we've seen this year, and it looked like at points he was riding a Honda, the way he was having to wrestle it through that last sector, especially. It wasn't plain sailing, and I think he even said after the race he was kind of settling for second when he seen how quick his brother was, and then he realised with, I think, 6 or 7 laps to go, he was like, well, hang on, there's a bit more in reserve here, and then he just kind of done what he done in Thailand, albeit different circumstances. He just opened up the gap when he got through. But yeah, he was made to work for it, wasn't he?
Definitely, yeah. And I think Alex has been the revelation of the season so far. Really, I think to take the step that he has, he just looks so comfortable on that bike, doesn't he? As you say, Marc was getting out of shape, but Alex wasn't really, and it was quite. I think as Marc said, it was one corner, wasn't there? A left-hander, I think, was it maybe turn 6, where he couldn't believe that Alex was going through it better than him. Left-handers are his thing, and that's to Alex's credit. And I think there's no one that Marc would rather be racing up front than Alex. It's almost like Alex has become a sort of pseudo teammate, isn't he? Or is still his teammate. And they've said they're working together. They're speaking to each other about strategy. Everything's open. They know, as Lewis just said, they know they can trust each other when they're racing. I mean, they've ridden probably 1 million laps together, on all sorts of bikes during their lives. They know how each other races. They know they can trust each other. And I'm sure it's just another comfort level for both of them when they're at the front of the race, I think. But yeah, certainly, they're not, Alex is not making it easy for Marc, is he? That's the other thing. He does want to win. There's no doubt about that. And he was pushing him hard and genuine pace there. So yeah, really impressive. I mean, you take Marc out the equation, Alex would have won these 4 races. I mean, it's, and would be, beating Pecco, beating all of the other guys. Just such a step that he's made. So yeah, interesting to see, as you guys have said, if he can carry this on. But he's in that perfect situation, Alex, as a satellite rider, without that pressure of the title. Marc has that pressure. Marc is there to win the title this year, isn't he? And he has got that added pressure. He's in the factory team and everything else. Alex is just, he's got to enjoy. He's had a lot of dark moments in his MotoGP career, hasn't he? A lot of tough times back of the grid on the LCR Honda, and struggling and everything else. I mean, this is his moment to really, really enjoy the package that he's got. And who knows? Take the fight to Marc and just revel in that pressure-free atmosphere, I think.
Yeah, I enjoy the sort of comments after from both of them, and I love how Marc's always kind of bigging up Alex in the sense that when he kind of gets into this headspace that he knows he can fight for something, nothing can stop Alex. And I think we're seeing it almost this year in the early rounds, and you're like thinking, geez, there's 2 of these Marquez, and they're really different, but they're similar in the same way that Alex kind of has the when you watch him this year, and his bike's set up slightly different to Marc, that he likes to flow a bit more compared to Marc's sort of style on the brakes and everything. And I think you noticed it way more in Argentina. Obviously, in Thailand, I think he was kind of holding it back, and he was pretty comfortable. But yeah, 6 years away from a circuit that when you think about what he was last on when he was there in 2019, it was a Honda Zero Arrow, essentially. Completely different class, and to learn the track again, to have your brother. And I think what they said after the sprint, it was like a training session almost when they were following. And I think that's a good point, isn't it, Lewis? Because if it's your brother and you know what he does, they know each other's weaknesses and their strengths, and you can follow, you're into that sort of so much of an ease of confidence. You can trust someone. It's a good thing, but it's also like there's the added question people have said, well, what happens when it kind of gets a bit feisty? But Alex is batting those comments away, and he's saying, don't underestimate me and what I can do. I think Marc's kind of backed them up on that as well. Like they trust each other, but they won't be afraid to fight if they have to, really, will they?
Yeah, I mean, we kind of see how that develops. That would definitely be an interesting kind of story point, these 2 brothers, if they do have to get their elbows out. I think, over the weekend, Marc was obviously, he big Alex up all weekend. He was like, look, I think this Grand Prix will be difficult. Alex is able to be more consistent. And, you can easily kind of go, yeah, well, it's just he's being nice about his brother. But, the data does kind of back up everything Marc says. And if there's one, I think the telling thing for me, as Pete said, the fact that they were sharing strategy. And then, Marc said his strategy was to lead for the first sort of, 13, 14 laps, and then at that point, that was when he was going to push. And Alex said, okay, well, that's when I'll do the same. But then when the roles were reversed, Alex still stuck to that strategy and did that push and forced Marc into that push as well. So this isn't a rider kind of having his hand held. This is a rider who has really been given a big amount of credit from easily the best rider on the grid right now, and is keeping him honest. That Grand Prix would have had all the makings of potentially being quite boring, and Alex Marquez kept it exciting. He kept it tense, and I think Ducati will be not happy, obviously, that they've got 2 bikes up there, but not super happy that it's not really the right rider up challenging Marc right now. Obviously, over the winter, we all thought it was going to be Pecco Bagnaia. Marc said over the winter, Pecco's the reference. The factory bike was given to Fabio Di Giannantonio. The third factory was given to VR46 and Fabio Di Giannantonio. And, I wonder if Ducati's maybe regretting, some of those decisions right now, given, the form that Alex Marquez is on. And, if this carries on, it's a bit more of a headache for next year, because that factory exclusivity still stays with VR46, and what they were looking at and thinking, well, actually, we do Alex on the bike, because I think he's the 2 Marquez brothers are quite good for Ducati in terms of how they can develop a bike. If Marc's really strong on the brakes and Alex is really good at those flowing corners, there's a lot for Ducati to get in there to then put all together into next year's bike and, create something maybe even more dominant than they've already got.
Yeah, I think Alex Marquez for me is like, it's hard to say he's Rider of the Year so far, but he probably is because Mark is doing what he kind of is expected to do, and I think it's catching a lot of people out on. I see it on social media about Alex. They're like, "Geez, this guy is quick." I'm like, "Well, he is a two-time world champion, remember, and he does have the best machinery available to him, well, that he can have, and it's like he's feeding off his brother's energy as well. And I think when his brother's in a good mood and he's in a good mood, they just have this sort of like, just feel like they can just go out. It's like a track day, so they can. And I think when you look at the sessions, they were like first and second pretty much in every session. And like I think Alex was the quickest in practice too, and then like a warm up session, or like Mark was. But it's like they're just going out and they're just sticking to the plan, as you've been saying. They're talking strategy, and they're like creating this little pseudo team almost, like you say, like just to be, yeah, we'll go out, do this, no problem, bang. I think if you're Pecco Bagnaia, who, I mean, a weekend where it was coming in, he expected to struggle, and it's a circuit he's never had good results around. P3 in the sprint, I think that was a good result. In the consideration, you look back over the whole weekend now. P4 in the Grand Prix, though, I think that's disappointing because you're getting beat by your teammate, and then two satellite bikes in Frankie Morbidelli getting third, and then look behind, you've got Gian Antonio on the same bike, who also went for a different tyre option and was getting quicker at the end of the race. So how does Bagnaia pick himself up heading into Austin, which, as we know, it's one of Marc Marquez's favourite circuits? He just has to play the long game here, doesn't he, and not try and get beat mentally already after 2 rounds.
Yeah, exactly. I think he's just got to try and hold his nerve because I don't see things changing in the near future, to be honest. I mean, until we get to the point where they're testing new parts, I think that's the light at the end of the tunnel potentially for Pecco, is when they introduce the chassis upgrade, the aero upgrade. Maybe that will shake things up and it'll play more into his favour, but it might play even more into Mark's favour. You don't know, do you? But potentially, I think at the moment, as things stand, it's not just 4-0 as far as Mark versus Pecco for wins. Mark's been ahead of him in every track session this season, hasn't he? So it's like 14-0 as far as practice sessions and qualifying and everything else. So, I mean, that's he's got to start to break up that dominance, hasn't he, Pecco? And even if he isn't beating Mark, beating Mark at Kota is going to be massive. But even if it's just in practice sessions, qualifying ahead of him, getting him out of his stride somehow, because it's just all going so perfect at the moment. And as you say, to be behind, that's the shock, isn't it? Mark, especially Termes, everyone knows Mark is fantastic there. Even before the season started, we could have predicted, a great weekend for Mark here. But so Pecco's got to break up this run that Mark's got at the moment, but it's really difficult to see how he's going to do that, certainly at Kota. Qatar after that, again, I mean, I think you'd still put Mark as the overwhelming favourite. So one thing I think that maybe Pecco could have done to try and roll the dice a bit on Sunday is go with that soft tyre. Go with the VR46 gamble. I mean, it might not have worked, but he needs to just throw something out there that's a bit different. We saw that Morbidelli was able to make it work. Maybe he could have got up there and raced with the Marquezes a little bit at the start. I think that's the only thing he can kind of do, is try and go for something a bit different, because at the moment it's just all going the way of Marc and Alex. And then you throw in the pressure from the other satellite Ducatis, and as I say, that's the surprise, that those satellite machines are also beating Pecco, when really, this is the bike, in theory, that at the end of last year, it was Pecco and Martin dominating pretty much every session, wasn't it? And suddenly, now, everyone else is up there with him. So, it's character building time for Pecco, I think.
Yeah, it's actually character building. Yeah, absolutely. I think, for me, he's kind of stuck in this weird rut where it's like he's not slow, but he's not doing anything, and he hasn't led a lap this year at all, Lewis, and I think that's surprising to me. Like, because Pete says, even if he's fastest in a practice session, on paper he'd look and he'd see him and he'd say, 93's here. That would kind of give you a lift. You think, right, we're doing something here. But it's like, when the other satellite Ducatis are close around, how do you even solve that? Because he knows the bike that they're on, and he knows how good he was on that 24. Is it something that literally he just has to kind of mentally switch? Because it's like his teammate is going to improve as well, if he's expecting to improve, if that makes sense. There's no given that he can just get to a circuit that he likes and then it all comes together. He just has to kind of not reset almost. He needs to just, yeah, like get on top of it, but I don't know how. It's so difficult, isn't it?
Yeah, I mean, I think it's really hard to know because it's not like we're on a kind of a version of the Ducati that's not great. You know, Marc Marquez has proven that it is a good step forward. You know, this spec of bike that they're on. The Pecco one, I've always sort of believed this, that Pecco is far too sensitive to the bit. He needs it to be perfect for everything to kind of work out. He's not a rider that can just ride around things. You know, you listen to Marc, for example, and he said, look, we weren't great from the off in terms of feeling. I really needed to work on that. And, you know, there's clearly still margin there because Marc hasn't crashed yet this year on that bike. He's there, and that's a surprise. That means that the limits have not been tested, which is frightening because if that is the limit that Pecco has right now, you know, 5.5 seconds off his teammate, that's a big gap to knock down. And, you know, he said all weekend, you know, my pace was pretty close to the top two. It wasn't, you know, in the grand scheme of things over the weekend, you know, his average pace in the sprint compared to Marc was, you know, about 2.5 tenths a lap average slower. In the race, it was just over 2 tenths. So he's making steps forward, but they're not enough to make a difference. And this is the problem. And I think Ducati seemed to be a bit lost with it as well because, you know, Pecco, he's blamed, you know, the sprint races, he's blamed the fuel tank, and, you know, he blamed tyres as well. And Gigi Dall'Igna came out after the sprint and said, look, we need to figure this out, but I can categorically tell you there was not a tyre issue. Mm-hmm. So when you've got the rider saying one thing and the team saying another thing, and the team are really, really trying hard to G him up and keep his head level and be like, look, you're banking these points. This is, you know, last year you probably would have thrown at the scenery. It's, you know, we'll get there.
Yeah.
But the chasm there is massive. And you know, as Pete says, maybe things will work out when you get to Jerez and you can do a bit of testing. But let's not forget that the chassis that they put away for now was a chassis that Pecco tried on the GP24 last year and loved it.
At Misano, yeah, that's right.
And you have to assume that Ducati will probably look to give Alex Marquez that. So if you're putting that chassis that worked really well on that spec of bike, that's only going to complicate things further for Pecco because it just strengthens, it puts one more block in front of him and his teammate. Mm. So, you know, it's good that Pecco hasn't crashed yet. You know, it's good that he hasn't thrown at the scenery trying to override things. But, you know, you look at the pace of it, you know, especially on Sunday, his pace was good enough for fourth and no more. There was, you know, he was only going to catch Morbidelli because of the tyre difference. Yep. And like you say, Pete, maybe he should have gone for a different tyre strategy. But we've seen this before with Pecco, that he's gone for an alternate strategy when it wasn't necessary. And it's backfired on him, you know, last year in the sprints and stuff like that. So you just wonder how much of that's knocked his confidence as well, where he's not going to try something different because he's like, well, last year... And this is, I think this is what we're really seeing the problem with Pecco Bagnaia, is that he's too... he's not very adaptable. You know, he everything has to be lined up for him to work. He can't ride around a problem. He has to have everything in line or else it doesn't work. And we've seen this before. We saw kind of at the start of last year, it was kind of the same. The year before, it took until the Spanish Grand Prix for him to make that click with the setup. And I think it was the same in 2022 as well. So, you know, slow starts to the season are not uncommon. But back then he was fighting, you know, Jorge Martin. And no disrespect to Jorge Martin, but Jorge Martin is not Marc Marquez. And Marc Marquez doesn't have dips in performance. Marc Marquez only gets better.
Yeah.
And at what point does Ducati kind of put all of its chips in one basket and go, well, we're winning the championship this year, but it's not going to be a fight between the two of our riders, so let's focus on making this bike as best as it can be for Marc. That conversation probably has to happen quite soon.
Yeah. I think the thing for me with Bagnaia this year, it's maybe the fact that Martin was on the same bike as him, but not in the same team, kind of helped the team morale thing, because obviously Martin wins the title last year, but Bagnaia doesn't really see it because he's not in the same garage. Yes, they're on the same bike, but like it kind of is not easier to accept. Maybe it is, but like when you're looking across at your garage now and you're seeing the other mechanics who, let's be honest, last year didn't have a great year with an Airbus. They had an okay year, but like you're seeing that side of the team now really like have someone who's just leading them, like Marc, and he's becoming that team leader there. it must be a real kick in the stones, really, for him. I think it's tough. It's tough for anyone to take because it's your team and you've been the guy there, and you've seen someone come in, and it's like you're even losing now to his brother. And I seen a video on socials, like even Marc and Alex, they were in the Grassini garage jumping around, going nuts. I'm thinking you've got the Grassini side here just enjoying it as much as well. Yeah, and seeing VR46 take a podium from him, it's like it must be like a really tough situation for him. But I think that looking at third place, actually, and we can touch on the VR46s, Pete. Morbidelli, I think it's his first podium in 1,400 odd days since 2021, and he came out with comments after saying like he didn't know if he was kind of worth it, to be honest. He didn't really have his place in MotoGP, and he kind of struggled last year. He had that massive crash in pre-season and it set him back, but having the same machine and that confidence that he's kind of shown at the start of the year, yeah, he's had a few sort of incidents as he does with riding on the line slowly, and then that race incident with Binder in the sprint. But when Morbidelli gets into a nice groove, he's solid, isn't he? As a MotoGP rider, it shows that he can still fight for podiums.
It does, as you say. He's been through a lot of dark years, isn't he? He's had all these questions, almost a bit like Pecco's going through now. When he was next to Quartararo at Yamaha, wasn't it? And it was, why aren't you doing what Fabio's doing? Why aren't you as quick as Fabio? Yeah. You've got to change your style. You've got to do things differently. And that's going to be the situation that Pecco's going to be in if this carries on. He's going to have those same questions, isn't it? And it's a real difficult one for a rider to be in, because all riders are different with their riding styles, their setups and everything else. But yeah, he's gone through all that and back on the podium and riding really well, wasn't he? It took the tyre gamble, but still, it was a great ride by him to manage the tyre and get back on the podium. As you say, for the first time since 2021. So a long time. He's under pressure, of course. His ride is the only Ducati seat, as far as we know, that is still up for grabs for next year. So there's the rumours are like maybe Acosta might be eyeing up that ride if things don't go to plan at KTM and all that other stuff. So there's a lot of pressure there for him. Also because just of how good the ride is, as you guys have been saying. I mean that's also why there's going to be a lot of people that want to have a Ducati ride, because they now know they're going to have basically the factory Ducati engine for the next year, aren't they? Next season as well. So it's going to be the satellite bikes, Ducati bikes, going to be really sort of sought after. He's got the only one that's still available, and he's doing a good job of saying, look, before you put anyone else in this seat, I'm quite keen on keeping it, and I deserve it. And let's see where he goes from here. He's got that confidence back now. That's always a big thing with riders, isn't it? And let's see where he can build from here. And Digia, his teammate, not that far behind either, and also coming back from more recent injury, of course. So also a good ride for him. I mean, it's not, again, if we go back to Pecco, a fully fit Digia could well have been ahead of Pecco as well on Sunday, couldn't it?
Absolutely. And as you know, they're riding the same bike essentially, and it's like 1.5 off him at the ends, and as Pete rightly points out, still coming back from that injury in pre-season, and it's like that's the worry. You're looking over Bagnaia's shoulders thinking, geez, there's another Ducati here and he's right on me. I think that's a really good point to see how that will change going into Coda and Qatar, a track that Digia Antonio really likes as well, remember? So let's see what Digia Antonio can do, and like I say, well done to Morbidelli for getting the podium. It was nice to see him on there. And then I suppose the other talking point from the weekend, Lewis, Honda, fantastic. Johan Zarco, I think easily his best weekend for Honda in his time there. I mean, I couldn't really believe it on Friday. I was thinking, Zarco's woke up really nicely today. He's on it. And then on Saturday, the qualifying lap for me is the highlight for him. I mean, to put it on the front row, ridiculous, I think. And then the ride in the sprint, I think he's kind of gutted he didn't get the podium there. I think he had a chance. He just kind of got caught up in early battles, and the Honda doesn't have the punch on the straights. It loses out a lot there. But his Grand Prix ride to P6 is fantastic, isn't it?
Yeah, we saw the Honda progress in the winter, and we were all like, I think things can go well here. I think they could fight for a podium. I don't think we expected them to be up there quite so quickly. I think that's really been the real surprise there, not so much the pace, more the fact that it's come so quickly. Clearly, there's an issue there, which is the power, and we saw that in the Grand Prix. We saw that in the sprint. Is that when he's in those situations where he's got bikes around him, he's really, really fighting against it. So qualifying is more important for the Honda, but this is a type of track that does suit the bike. It's much more agile. We saw this a couple of years ago in Kota. You know, those tracks where you need a good handling bike. You can kind of ride around the power problems and the grip issues, and you know, so I don't see Argentina as being a one and done thing for Honda. I think this really is just step one on the way up, really. And Zarco's been great. You know, we saw this last year. He jumped on the Honda, and I didn't really kind of think much about that move, to be quite honest with you. I kind of thought, well, you know, you took all this time to win a Grand Prix, you've turned your back on a Ducati. You know, Ducati offered him to stay at Pramac for at least another year and then maybe move him on to World Superbikes. You know, you've taken a 2-year, you're 34, you're taking a 2-year deal at Honda right now. I'm not really, you know, I don't really get the logic there, but fair play to Zarco. He has been Honda's leading light for the past year and a bit now, and he will get there. Like, that podium is coming. I think it is a matter of time. You know, I think you look at, you know, possibly Austin, certainly Jerez, you know,
Definitely.
where power isn't a problem and the Honda's always gone well there. You kind of have to look at rounds like that and think, maybe something good could be on the cards. But it's not just Zarco. You know, Mir was quick all weekend. I think kind of unfortunate that when it came to the crunch time in FP2 or practice, that the tyre didn't quite work on his qualifying lap, and I think had he had a better, you know, a bit more luck there, you probably would have had him straight into Q2 directly anyway. You know, Marini having his best weekend on the Honda is all coming together for them. And if you look at, you know, where KTM's doing, you look at Yamaha right now, you look at Aprilia, Honda's the second best. You have to say Honda's the second best manufacturer right now. Coming out of Argentina, Honda is firmly the second best manufacturer. They were the top non-Ducati, ahead of KTM, and by a good distance.
Yeah.
Binder was about 7 seconds behind Zarco. You know, Honda needs to obviously keep its feet on the ground, keep developing the bike, but they have real reason to be happy. And this is all in a bike that hasn't had the influence of Romano Albesiano yet. And I think this is the thing we need to point out, is that a lot was made about that over the winter. And I think Zarco himself said, look, he was only here a month when we started testing. This bike was developed by the Japanese engineers, and they're not stupid. They know what they're doing. So you think they've already got a base package? Albesiano, in theory, doesn't. We thought maybe pre-season he's going to have to come in and unravel that, unpick everything and put it back together. I don't think that's the case anymore. He's got a good base package to work with. He now has something, if anything, where you can now put his touch on it, and that should only just raise Honda's game even more. So I think the Honda thing is definitely legitimate. You know, I think it's a definitely legitimate thing. I don't think this is just circumstance, you know, flash in the pan thing. I think this is a genuine step forward, and I think they will only get better. I think Honda can genuinely aim to be the second best manufacturer this year if they carry on what they're doing now.
Yeah, there was a really good photo in Parc Ferme of qualifying when Zarco got in there, and Marc Marquez and Alex Marquez were looking at the Honda, and I was just like, they're looking at it going, I used to ride that thing, and it's like, well, it's here again. I think it's nice, to be honest, because the engine struggles have, the lack of power, I think, it's almost turned that bike, I kind of get my analogy, it's turned into a Yamaha almost again. It's like, it's handling so well in the corners, Pete, and I think I heard Matt Burt say on commentary, look how well that Honda's turning, and I was like, when was the last time you heard that sort of thing? I think it's a real credit to the test team and the engineers and everyone at Honda for keeping the faith, because I'd love to know the impact that Lisa Spargo's had in testing in that short time, because has he looked at it and says, if we just make this engine a little bit slower, this bike's got a really good base here for your chassis, your turning, your everything. I think that's the key, isn't it? Because I said, when was the last time there was 3 Hondas in the top 10 of a Grand Prix weekend? I can't seem to remember, but it's surely positive heading into circuits like Lewis says, Pete, that Coda, it's got that nice sort of, you can turn well, and then you get to Jerez, for example, where engine power doesn't matter. It's got to be a really good, promising time to be a Honda rider, doesn't it?
It definitely looks that way, yeah. As you say, you know, it's not just, although Zarco is obviously making the headlines, as you guys say, it's the other Honda riders are up there as well. Mir, you know, was quick, Thailand, and Marini, I think that's, you know, one of his best results, isn't it, on the Honda? in the top 10 as well. So it's working for more than one rider. It's not just one rider at one track, everything falling into place. They're consistently getting this sort of performance. And interesting, isn't it, that they seem to have gone full circle. When they were searching for more power, more performance, because they thought we need that because then we can run a load more aero, which obviously eats up the straight line speed, and it didn't work for them, did it? And now it seems like it's the same sort of journey that Yamaha's taking, where they're going back towards trying to find the handling again, even though it cost them in top speed, because as we can see over the lap, it pays off more. And and I mean, it's not easy, but you've got to imagine it's easier to get a bit more power from an engine that's handling well than to go the other way and make a bike that's got loads of power handle. And that's presumably where they are now. So there will be upgrades, as we know. They've got concessions. They can change the engine during the year. So that's the challenge for them, I guess, is to not lose what they've got as far as the engine and the turning now, but just get, what do they need? At least another 5-6 kilometers per hour to sort of get on top, isn't it? That won't put them at the top, of course, but just to sort of fight with the others on the straight, or at least not lose out too much. So they have a clear direction there. They have a clear area where they need to work, but they've made progress. And as you say, I think they are best of the rest behind Ducati. I mean, who would have imagined that? At the start of the year, it's a real big step for them. And let's see at Kota, as you say, Kota, twisty tracks, Jerez. I think they're in for a decent season. I think this could be. We've waited a long time, haven't we, for Honda? Everyone always says, Honda will get there in the end. And Marc decided, look, I can't wait any longer. And I think a lot of people are wondering, when will they ever get there? Well, maybe the light at the end of the tunnel is there now.
Yeah, Johan Zarco P5 in the World Championship as well, which is, I think it's awesome for Honda, and just that morale boost to see that. Yeah, brilliant from Honda. Lastly, Ogura, Lewis, great recovery ride from mine. I think he was P15 to P8, and then after the race comes out that he is disqualified because of non-homologated software. Shame for it's something that I think maybe as a rookie it won't really affect him that much because he knows where he finished on track, but shame for his points total because he was sitting P5 then in the standings after 2 rounds. But yeah, a bit of an odd one. We've seen it with Alex Rins, even in a practice session in Thailand, get disqualified because of non-homologated software. Any more update on what that exactly means for our listeners? Do you have an idea?
No, it's a bit of an odd one, isn't it? I mean, in theory, this is a spec championship in terms of electronics. I'm not really sure how you're running non-homologated software. Trackhouse says it wasn't a performance. It wouldn't have enhanced performance, and I think that's probably true. It's probably something. Yeah, it'll be a very, very silly small thing, like a control unit they've used with maybe a setting that was from testing, which is the same one they would use in racing, but it just wasn't officially stickered by the scrutineers, essentially. So, a bit of an oversight. And to be fair, not to pile on the Trackhouse team, but it's not the first time we've seen issues with that satellite team and that Aprilia. There have been a few occasions over the past couple of years where they have dropped the ball in terms of setting up that bike. We saw last year, obviously, Miguel Oliveira in Indonesia, where there was a short circuit on the bike and it sent him into a high side. We've seen in 2022 as well, I think when it was the RNF team, both riders kind of spoke about that the package wasn't particularly healthy in terms of of the kind of help that we're getting from Aprilia, and these things happen. There are a lot of human errors can happen in motorcycle racing, but one to be aware of, because it's a stupid thing to lose such a good result of and a good haul of points. 8th is a really that's 8 points, isn't it? I think for 8th place in MotoGP for a rookie, that should have put him 5th in the championship on 25 points, which is pretty strong stuff. And I won't be disappointed with his pace and his performance, given it's not a great track for him. And he said I need to come in and have a challenging weekend. It's such a great Thailand. I need to now come in and almost come back down to earth. But yeah, with a rider like that who's putting in these performances and will only get better as the year goes on, the team just needs to make sure that they're holding up their end of the bargain, because 8th is one thing, but what happened to what might the reaction have been had he gotten all the way up into the top 5, for example? That's a harder one to swallow. So yeah, a curious one, and one that perhaps other teams might fall foul of at some point this season as well. We've seen 2 kind of similar incidents already, but yeah, the team just needs to make sure they don't repeat that, because it's a bit of a waste given where Aprilia is right now and all the difficulties it's had with Jorge Martin's injury, and now Lorenzo Savadori's injured, and Bez obviously had his crash in lap 1 as well. So Ogura is a leading light for Aprilia, and they can't really afford to be dropping the ball so much.
They can't pick. What do you make of that? It was kind of a shame for Ogura, isn't it? Because you read the statement from Tracker, it said it doesn't affect it wouldn't have given him any advantage at all, and it's like that's sort of just takes the gloss off it a little bit, doesn't it?
Yeah, I mean, the first thing is, as you guys have said, let's hope this doesn't cost him in terms of the Rookie of the Year battle, because it is a decent amount of points, isn't it? And okay, he's quite a long way ahead of Aldeguer at the moment, but it's a long season, and with rookies, the performance tends to swing more, doesn't it, as the year goes on? So, let's hope that doesn't come back to bite him there. Yeah, it seems like it's something from testing. So obviously they all have to use the same software, don't they? The software gets upgraded, but there's obviously a testing process for the upgrades of that software. Presumably they were testing an upgrade for the system for everybody during testing. It's not officially allowed to be used in the Grand Prix, but they've left it on the ECU. It seems it's something like that. Yeah, so very similar, as you guys have said, to what happened with Rins, where they're using an ECU that, or it was a lap timer or something, wasn't it, that wasn't officially stickered for use. So again, not perhaps a performance part or not performance enhancing or anything, but not, you're not allowed to use it. So, it has to be homologated, which means basically just checked and officially registered for use in the Grand Prix, doesn't it? And so yeah, strange that it slipped through the net, if you like, and was, obviously they'll have to change their systems to make sure that this doesn't happen again, because it's a lot of points to throw away. And just generally, as you say, for Aprilia, I mean, really lucky that they didn't end up, well, Savadori obviously out with injury. They've already got Martin out with injury. That was a big accident for Bez on Sunday as well. They could have potentially had another rider out with injury. Interesting, wasn't it? Bez got an official warning. I suppose that's something that we should bring up, which seems like a sensible move, I think, because he didn't bring any other riders down. Obviously, he did affect Quattraro's race. He didn't destroy it, because Quattraro in the end got a couple of points, didn't he? But he did make contact with another rider. He did make a mistake. So I think an official warning. It said for a first offence, didn't it? So presumably, if there was a carbon copy incident, then he would get a penalty next time. And I think that's fair enough, isn't it? It's interesting, I thought, to see that. But where it becomes a harder call with these first offences is when it's a bigger incident, isn't it? When other riders get brought down, and then if you're another team now, you'd say, well, yeah, but it was my rider's first offence, so same as Bez, right? so that's when it becomes difficult in the future with these things. There's never any easy answer with these sort of first corner incidents, but Bez held his hands up, didn't he? And I think for an official warning, don't do it again. If you do it again, you will get punished, I think was the right decision. But as I say, fortunately, he's not injured, because as we know, Martin's not going to be back, is he, for Kota? We know that officially now. Question mark about Qatar, all this, will they get a test? Will they be able to change the rules and get everyone to agree? Seems slightly, I don't know, unlikely that everyone will agree. I think Ducati are not quite sure, are they?
Ducati are like, wait till next year.
Yeah. Or wait till later in the season, where we're just, we're sure how the championship's going to go before we. Well, I mean, bottom line, let's hope we see Martin back fit and healthy as soon as possible. But Qatar, it sounds like questionable, isn't it? If not, I guess it'll be Jerez round 5.
Yeah, Lewis, I think you raised your hand. Any thoughts on the Aprilia stuff?
Yeah, I mean, from the penalty point of view, you do have to wonder in these types of situations, maybe need to look at, instead of cancelling something, if there was no obvious or evident or very clear-cut performance gain, do you just, hand down a fine? I think we see that kind of, I think in Formula 1, for example, I think we've seen on occasion where, offences like that, pit lane speeding, something on the car that's not quite right but isn't like a problem necessarily, just hand them down a fine. I wonder if maybe that's the way to go. They followed they followed the rule book. If it's an illegal part, you can't race it, so you have to be disqualified. So that's fair enough, at least it's consistent, but it does seem a bit harsh when it was something quite innocuous that, didn't really have any benefit to Ogura's race. But then obviously a team could argue, well, of course it did because we didn't have it, so blah blah blah. But the race direction, the stewards can have access to all the data, and they'll be able to see, that if there was a gain or not. Interesting on the first offence thing. I think the stewarding, for the most part, to begin the Simon Crafar era as head steward, has been pretty spot on. I think, yes, okay, Freddie Spencer was an ex-racer, but I think Simon Crafar being a bit more recent of an ex-racer, let's say, but someone that still continues to ride bikes, fairly in anger. He obviously was kind of KTM testing, I think, as well for a while in terms of like suspension parts and that type of thing. And obviously he does all of these BMW laps all the time, so he's quite fresh. I think he understands what the circuits are like every weekend when he gets there. And obviously being a TV pundit as well for all these years, he understands the riders. He understands the riders. He understands the racing situation. He understands the development of the bikes as well. He knows, like, for example, Bez's turn one incident with Fabio kind of looked like the front ride height device didn't quite come up, because you see him pump the brakes a couple of times, and that's usually is a signal that the device hasn't fully disengaged. Alex Marquez had a similar thing in the sprint where his didn't disengage for a few corners, so there does seem to be a much more bigger picture approach to stewarding now, which I think is good. Let's hope that continues. I think the first offence thing is an interesting one, but I think obviously the way to look at it is, Bez ruined his own race, took himself out. Yes, he compromised Fabio Quartararo, but that was turn one racing incident. Had he wiped out Fabio and maybe a couple other riders, then okay, first offence, but it was a more serious offence. And that seems to be the way they go. And you look at the Morbidelli incident with Binder in the sprint race was a clear-cut race incident, and that's what it was deemed. They were very proper when it came to giving Morbidelli a penalty for getting in the way of Bagnaia. In Thailand, there was I can't remember who it was in Moto3 that had a pretty...
David Munoz.
Munoz had a pretty stupid incident in Thailand, and they gave him, a pretty hard penalty to kind of reflect that.
And yesterday he served the penalty, and he was 14 seconds off the next person, and he pulled in because he couldn't catch anybody, and then his team sent him back out again. So essentially he was punished correctly, because then he wasn't interfering with anyone else. And I think, let me just go off on David Munoz here, he deserved it because the number of years he'd been at it, and I think that the stewarding didn't allow him to be punished correctly. And I think giving him double long lap penalties didn't solve anything.
Well, we saw who was it in the Moto3 race? Joe Kelso had a couple of long lap penalties. He was still 8th. And we've seen this before. People serve long lap penalties and still come through to win races, especially in those lower classes. So it does seem like the stewarding is assessing penalties in a much better way, that there is an actual clear punishment there rather than just something quite innocuous the rider can brush off. So, fair play to Crafar. I don't think anyone expected him not to do a good job, but I think it's been a surprise that they've had quite a few different varied calls, and I think they've all been spot on. I wouldn't really look at any of them and go, I'm not really sure about that. I think every call has been fine, so that's good. It'll be interesting when we do get that first big incident. The thing I would hope from Crafar, and I think a few other people have said the same thing, which we didn't get with Spencer, was coming out on camera and giving an explanation. We know in these steward documents they have gotten a bit better at explaining things, but Crafar, being a TV guy, being comfortable in front of cameras, hopefully when there is an incident like that, he can come out and be like, okay, here's why we did a penalty. People have said this incident was the same, but this is why it's been assessed differently. I think there's a lot of really positive things to come out of this era of stewarding, and it's long been needed, because the problems we've had over the past few years were not just from the past couple of years. Those have been from, for a good 5 years now since Spencer's been in charge. A lot of people have been unhappy, and it's 2 races down. I know it's only 2 races, but nobody's really complained about the stewarding. Every rider's gone, fair cop. Aldegué was the same, incident in the sprint race. It was my fault, penalties fair. Morbidelli was the same in Thailand. He was like, totally get it. Actually, Crafar kind of walked me through where I went wrong, and actually it's given me something to think about. And that's good, because you think to Spanish Grand Prix last year when Zarco wanted a penalty for, was it Digia?
I think so, yeah.
When they collided, And Zarco blew up in Freddie Spencer's face because he didn't get the explanation that he needed. So clearly there has been a much bigger culture shift within the stewarding office, and that will only be a good thing for us and the fans, because it means that the racing will, in theory, not be interrupted by stupid things.
Yeah. Do you know what? It's the way I see it. See, in football or any sport you watch as a referee, see, the less you're talking about the referee, the better. And the referee is making the right calls. That is perfect. That's all we need.
I would say that clearly Simon Crafar is the first kind of referee in any position, clearly with a gift of sight, because his calls have all been pretty spot on.
Well, Simon, if you are listening, keep up the good work. I think, it's well needed, and I like the processes that the riders are even coming out, as you say, Lewis, and they're kind of talking about it in a good way. So that's all we need, and I think that if we can continue it for the next however months, years, perfect. But yeah, let's see when the next big incident happens, how it's dealt with, because that'll be the first sort of, I think, real test and measure of how his position is going to evolve and how he's going to communicate, because he needs to get it right first off. But he's doing a good job so far. And that's pretty much it from Argentina. Week break, and then we have Texas. And heading into Texas, I imagine that there's a very happy 93 sitting on an airplane somewhere right now, thinking about, getting back to the place where I usually go pretty well and have a championship lead. 31 points he has over his teammate, Pecco Bagnaia. Let's see if that gap can close, or will it even extend. It's going to be interesting. Make sure to join us next time on our podcast. If you're watching on YouTube, leave a comment on what you thought of the weekend. Who was your rider of the weekend? Love reading those. And if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, hit the bell notification so you never miss another episode. But until then, we'll see you next time.